So we could say probably give it until like 7:05, 7:05, 7:07. Then
That's fine.
Cool.
Actually, it's more relaxing no
Really?
is on.
I think it might just be a thing where probably this upcoming Sunday we'll need to promote that you're here on Thursday evenings, because I don't know how many people will be too in the know that this is happening Thursdays, if that makes sense.
I understand. I was surprised to find out that these talks were on a Thursday night. So
Right.
I was thinking somehow it would be some other time.
Right.
But whatever it is.
And they're going to be recorded. So
Yeah.
hopefully whoever's seeing this right now knows what's up.
One of my daughters might be interested enough to actually download it and look at it.
There's Hojo.
There's Hojo.
This may be the attendance for the night. We should get more next week.
We were just speculating that was the case.
We were going to get started around 7:05-ish.
Yeah, I would give it a little time. But you both look marvelous.
Thank you.
Marvelous. Good.
You know, the Zendo is really a nice look on screen. I don't usually see it from this perspective. It's really pretty cool.
It's pretty impressive. It gets people invited to come in.
It's a great backdrop. I really like this.
And it's not even fake.
It's the real thing, which is appropriate.
Are we recording? Yeah, okay, good. So what happens, Roger, is this goes to Facebook as well. And I don't know if Tsuki is savvy at handling the Facebook part, but we tend to get questions from Facebook as well. And it is posted so people can see this who aren't visiting tonight. So we never worry too much about the attendance.
And I was not worried. I was thinking I would do a few breaks because it's a long talk, but I may, since it's you, just go all the way through.
It's up to you.
Okay.
If you want to stop for breaks, then I may ask some questions.
Maybe I will stop for breaks for your questions.
You actually look better this way than you do in person.
That's a remark I will take under consideration.
I think Taylor has hit the, down by the camera, there's a little button that you hit and it brings up and it says video settings. And amongst those are touch up my appearance.
I haven't done any of that today.
Okay.
But I know what you're talking about.
Adjust for low light. That's a little, they put a little Vaseline on the screen, I think.
Okay.
So as we get older, we revert to our younger person. So aging in reverse. Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook. Okay.
Are you doing an introduction?
Oh, yes, I should do an introduction. Okay. So it's about 7:07. A little brief introduction, as I promised. This is Getsu Roger Cochran, on here for Angao for the month of June. This Thursday night, as well as the following 2 Thursday nights, there is going to be a Dharma talk that he will be presenting towards us. And that's pretty much my spiel. If you want to add anything else
Okay.
to that or any
Yeah.
clarifications?
I would like to. Segets has been a long-term student and member, and frankly can't even remember how far back we go. But he and his wife were both exposed to Zen training early on. They had a teacher out of Chicago who knew Matsuoka Roshi, a gentleman named Kubosi, and I believe Korean, right? It's a Korean name.
Japanese.
Kubosi is Japanese, okay.
Yep.
So, but he was a Shin Buddhist.
In Buddhist. Yes.
Buddhism. And blocking him on camera. Segets has been instrumental in establishing the Jacksonville Zen Center affiliate, which up until a few years ago, he was the practice leader there. Along with Dorothy, his wife, they led that congregation. And then he moved back to Peachtree City. Those of you who know Ungan Bill Mayhew, who was here a month or so ago on Angao, and will be coming back in July, took over that operation from when Roger Segets and Dorothy returned to the Atlanta area, and has done a great job in continuing the congregation that Roger had established there. So kudos to Seigetsu. He's going to give us a little bit of his life story. This is what we call a wayfinding talk. It's typical of the first talk that anyone who is training for the priesthood gives under supervision. It's basically going to be about how he got into Zen, what was going on in his life, and why he's sticking with Zen. I think this is a very important message for everyone to hear today, because now we have choice between a lot of different alternatives out there, all different kinds of meditation, all different kinds of paths that we can enter. And the Zen path is, we think, unique. And I think Segets, his Dharma name means something like star and moon, is an exemplar of this path. So happy to introduce you, Segets. Welcome.
Thank you, Sensei. When you had asked me to do a wayfinding talk, my initial thought had been, oh, that would be up to the point where I met Sensei. That would have been where I found the way. And as I was doing it, I realized that that was not even the beginning of the path. It wasn't the middle, and it's not the end. So I've wound up with what will seem like an interminable visit through the events that to me have been important in informing and in shaping my path to Zen and my staying in the Zen path, and what I've been able to do through that path. So how did I find Zen to start with? I grew up in Southwest Atlanta in the 40s and 50s. This was a very racially segregated community in Southwest Atlanta. I attended a Southern Baptist church, Beecher Hills Baptist Church. I went every Sunday morning and Sunday evening and Wednesday evening to Wednesday night prayer services. My father was a deacon, and so I was immersed in the Southern Baptist belief system about Christianity from a young age. As part of that, in that belief system, you demonstrate your faithfulness to it by becoming a full-fledged Christian, and you do that by being baptized. So the young girl who was my age across the street at about 8 went down the aisle to get baptized, join the church, and then get baptized. And she did. And there's a church ceremony for the baptism. And after that, I was consumed with jealousy that she was seen by all the church, and I wanted that. I wanted that very badly. So I told my family that I wanted to join the church. They didn't ask why, and neither did the minister. So I joined the church. A few years later, as I got a couple of years older, I realized that this declaration of faith wasn't real, and that somehow God, the deity of that church, was going to be angry at me. And so I said to myself, I need to go through a ceremony called rededication, which is when you rededicate your life to Jesus and God. So I did that. And then as I got a little older, I had this realization, or this sense that rededication was still not the real thing. And so I asked for a second rededication, and I got it. I'm not sure what the age was, but I was pretty sure at that time that God was going to punish me for a fake conversion. So I carried that sense of not being a real Christian through high school, which was when I was introduced to science in its various forms, and I became curious about what science had to offer. And I was particularly interested in Darwin because Darwin and the theory of evolution was held in my church to be a principal exemplar of, if not Satanist thinking, just wrong-headed attitudes toward Christianity. So as part of understanding that, I argued that I needed to read Darwin in order to be able to contradict from a Christian point of view what was going on in that relationship between Christianity and Darwin's theory of evolution. It took a conversation with the minister to get my parents to agree to allow me to read Darwin's book on the origin of species. And I did. It was a wonderful read, which I highly recommend to anybody, Christian or not. But at the conclusion of that, what I came to feel was Darwin had nothing to say about a relationship with a deity, and he had everything to say about what went on in the evolution of species, and that one could regard that in itself as a miraculous kind of event. I just didn't understand how the church could have a problem with a discussion of how finch beaks in the Galapagos Islands could differ from island to island. So following from that, I thought, well, I really need to understand better the opposition. And as part of doing that, it led me to read Bertrand Russell and his book, Why I Am Not a Christian. I found Russell to be very clear, but really cold in a literal and physical sense. I liked his arguments, but I found I was having difficulty in understanding the conundrum between facts, reason, science, and the Southern Baptist Christianity that I was being taught. And so once again, I decided the only way out of the conundrum was to become a real fire and brimstone Christian, to demonstrate my faith in what I had been being taught. And so I attempted to do that. And I began assembling a basic theology that God was omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient. That is, he was everywhere, knew everything, and had all power. But thinking on that made me think, well, if he knows that, he knows who's going to hell and is choosing not to do anything about it. It seemed to me to be the epitome of a cruel and thoughtless deity. So going on at this time was something that many of us have forgotten about. It was Brown versus the Board of Education in 1954, which required that schools offer equal opportunities to those of all races. The church itself backed up to a black community, and this Brown versus Board of Education finding by the Supreme Court was being discussed in the church. And so the minister decided to address this issue, given that we did back up to a black community. And he told the congregation one evening, yes, if we were to have a member of that black community come and ask to join our church, I would certainly do that. But you know, we baptize, and there's nothing in my instructions about how long I should hold a person under the water when they're baptized. There was uproarious laughter in the church. This seemed to be kind of a breaking point for me. And so at that point or thereabouts, I became really an angry, practically an evangelical atheist for over a decade. Sometime in my early 20s, having been this angry evangelical atheist for a while, I began saying, maybe there's another religious path that makes some sense for me. And I found a book on 50 separate religions that are practiced in the U.S. And two of those made eminent sense. One of them was Buddhism, with its emphasis on compassion. And the other was Unitarian Universalism, with its open acceptance of all religious paths. So I decided I needed to find a Buddhist church to find out more about. So I turned to what was the equivalent of Google at the time, which is the yellow pages for the telephone directory. And looking up churches in the telephone directory under B, there's lots of Baptists, but no Buddhists. So I said, well, that's a dead end in Atlanta. But there was a Unitarian church, which I found and became a participant in. And I found the respect for reason, science, and critical thought among Unitarians to be extremely compelling for me. And so that became my chosen religious spiritual path, something which was open to all religious faiths and even, as they said, to atheists and agnostics. So there was something for every part of me that was wondering exactly where I was headed. So I had been a participant in that church for some years, and in graduate school, I had the opportunity to spend a graduate year in Ghana. And I was able to travel into upper parts of Ghana, the upper half of the country. And in the process of making a number of trips up there, I ran into some missionaries. One missionary group was a Southern Baptist group about halfway up, and I stopped there one evening and asked if I could spend the night at their compound, and I was accepted for that. I told them, I lied. I said I had been raised a Southern Baptist, which in itself wasn't a lie, but I needed a place to stay and they were it. But later on that evening, a real Southern Baptist female missionary came and wanted a place to stay. And the response to her was, well, we do have empty rooms, but we have another person staying here, a man, and so we can't have men and women staying overnight unsupervised in our compound. And for me, that was egregious thoughtlessness. It was kind of a shocking decision that they would take that position. So that formed my opinion of missionaries, at least Southern Baptist missionaries, in places like Africa. Later on, for several trips into the northern region, I met a group of white fathers. They were Catholic missionaries. They did not give any, they were not worried at all about the state of my soul, or even about the state of the souls of the people that they were there serving in their agricultural mission. They gave grain and agricultural advice to everybody who needed it. When I came down with malaria on several occasions, they provided Camoquin, which got me through those malarial attacks. That really shaped my opinion, it changed my opinion about Catholicism and its relationship to people. So that was two different ways of missionaries looking at their evangelical mission. So having the opportunity to make a number of trips into northern Ghana, I was able to obtain a motorcycle. I rode from Legon, the academic community, about 200 miles to the north. And on one trip, it was at the start of the farming season, at a time when the farmers needed to burn off the undergrowth in order to provide fertilizer for the next season's crops. So in the southern part of the country, I was coming down a hill and on my motorcycle, and I ran into this dense fog of smoke. And it was kind of a mystical experience. I could see, I knew what was going on. I knew that it was smoke. I knew I was traveling downhill, but it was as if I was descending into another world in the midst of the haze. It was a mystical experience outside of time and space. At least that's what I felt at the time. And it's what I feel when I think about that again. So it's that sense of the inexplicable, that which is not mundane, being in the midst of that which is ordinary. So as I continued my visits into northern Ghana, I began visiting regularly a village called Talke. It was a village of a small ethnic and linguistic group called the Vagla. They were a very warm and welcoming people, and they were unrepentant pagans, which really attracted me. But as I got there at the end of the dry season, they were also in need of being able to plant their crops. But they could not do that until the monsoon season started, because to do it would risk all of their seed crops for the coming year. And so the village elders got together with their chief, the Vaglakuru, and said, we need to find out why we're not getting rain so that we can start planting our crops. And so they met together. I attended the meeting. The Vaglakuru spoke to the elders, who said to him, well, we understand your problem. We know that you need the rains in order to plant your crops, otherwise they'll die in the ground. And we're willing to send rain to you, but in return, we want you to sacrifice a sheep in appreciation of all that we as the elders of the village and your previous ancestors have done. So the Vaglakuru said, yes, yes, we'll do that. We'll sacrifice a sheep. But in the meantime, I've got a chicken here. Could I sacrifice a chicken in token of the upcoming sacrifice of the sheep? And would you release the rain then? And the ancestors said, yes, sacrifice the chicken, we'll send the rains, and you can send us the sheep later. It was a clear sky, blue. Within a half hour, clouds gathered. They were dark and thunderous. There was a monsoon downpour that swept through the village. It was an amazing coincidence from my point of view. From the village's point of view, they had a deal with the ancestors and they met it. But the Vaglakuru, being a very canny person, said, well, thank you so much to the ancestors. We appreciate it. We don't have a sheep on hand at the moment. Would you take 2 chickens? And the ancestors agreed to the 2 chickens. So all of this has been an experience of what is almost inexplicable. There are rational reasons for all of this, and yet the experiencing of them has been an important part of my journey to understand that which is outside myself. So I came back from Ghana after a year and spent some time then reconnecting with the Unitarian Church. I had moved back to Atlanta and congregations like UUs have a difficult time finding someone to be president. They want someone who will show up faithfully, help organize things in the absence of a minister. And so I got elected as president. So that was something that put responsibility on me for organizing sermons, talks, keeping things going. And UUs sometimes talk about themselves as being God's frozen people, not particularly interested in many of the things that other religious groups are, but interested in how they can be participants in the community. So I was teaching a Sunday school, an adult Sunday school class as part of what I was doing. And as part of that class, I ran into something called mystical atheism. And just the title alone intrigued me. And I began reading some about Buddhism at that point. And I believe Sensei has got a comment or a question. Nope, I mistook the raised finger. So that class, talking about that class, led me to reading some more about Buddhism, and I sensed that at that point, the Buddhist approach would be something good for me to explore later. And I didn't find much about Buddhism. I didn't really know where to look, but for some reason, I was driving through Little Five Points coming down a street called McClendon Avenue. And as I came down McClendon Avenue, slowly there was an old service station that had been converted into a craft shop and a religious center. And as I drove past the center, it said Atlanta Soto Zen Center. And I stopped and I backed up. I looked at the sign again. Underneath it said, all those who come are welcome. Those who leave are not pursued. And this seemed like the place that I might learn something more about Buddhism from. So I stopped, I pulled in, I went in the craft shop. They said, the place is locked up. We can't get you in the front door, but we've got a back door. I'll let you in the back door. And so So they did, and I entered the back door through the clothes closet for the Zendo and walked into what had been the work bays for the service station. It was all concrete blocks. There was an area to the left with gong and drums, and there was a large Buddha on a stand at one end. But for some reason, when I walked in and saw these strange things that I didn't know and I didn't understand, I had this warm feeling that I was home. Now, that's a completely irrational response. I knew nothing about it. But it just felt like there was something there. Maybe it was all the meditation in front of those stone walls that was seeping through. But that became a home for me. And when I was not involved with the UU Church, I came as often as I could to the Atlanta Soto Zen Center and learned something about Zen and about Buddhism. And from that wandering in, ASCC and Elliston Roshi have been a part of my life ever since. I began coming on Sundays when I could and evenings when it was possible. Eventually, I took Jukai, and I began to think that I understood some of what I saw and heard. So I was still as president of the Emerson UU congregation while I was doing this. And out of desperation, I decided for one of the Sunday service talks, I would talk about something I knew a little about, which was Buddhism. So I gave a talk on Buddhism, which I look back on as being extremely superficial and not very informed. Now, UUs have, many of them, an opportunity at the end of a sermon or a talk to pose a question or a challenge to the speaker. And our congregation had that opportunity. It's a talk back is what it's called. So at the end of my talk, this person raises their hand at the very back of the room, puts their hands on the pew in front of them, and leans over in a pretty aggressive manner, which is kind of the signal you're about to get a question you may not be able to answer. And she said, "My father's a Buddhist, and he doesn't do any of this stuff." So that led then to an opportunity to speak more about the varieties of Buddhist practice and more about why I had chosen some of the things that seemed particularly available as talking points about Buddhism and Zen. But I thought to myself afterwards, when the congregation goes downstairs for coffee, that would be a person I would like to meet. And so as president, you get surrounded by people who have things they want to ask and talk about, and that happened. And at some point, I realized this person who had asked that very difficult question was going up the stairs to leave. And so I ran up the stairs and got her phone number. And we had a couple of dates. On the third, she said, "I don't want to waste my time. I'm not going to go out with anyone who does not have a similar set of values." And she gave me a set of cards that listed 16 values and asked me to do a card sort. As a sociologist, this is one of the ways that you find out what people are doing and thinking. And I thought, this is really cool. So I did the card sort. It turned out that we both had the same top 6 values in the same order, with one exception. I said my top 2 values are spirituality and health. Hers were health and spirituality. So for 30 years, we've been having the discussion about which is more important. After a few years, we began attending the McLendon Avenue Atlanta Soto Zen Center. And in a few years, the Roshi there, Elliston Roshi, married us. About that same time, I took Zake Takudo and became a disciple. And although I had never met Matsuoka, it turned out that my Wagesa, my Rakusu, had been prepared by Matsuoka and countersigned by Elliston Roshi. So that has become an extremely important artifact to me. I'll admit shameless pride in having Matsuoka's signature on my so it's something that I keep safe. And the one time I thought I lost it was disastrous, but I found it again, and I'm not letting it out of my sight. So I've been studying with Hojo now for 30 some odd years. I know he despairs of my ever making any progress. But he's allowed me to organize and conduct weekly discussion groups on Zen, the Dharma Studies group, and has encouraged that. And we managed an online archive of those discussions. About a year, maybe more ago, I was able to turn responsibility for that group over to Kuwa-san, who has really improved the organization and management of the study group. And so I'm very grateful to her for managing that group. But back to my marriage to Dorothy, which has been an important part of my Buddhist path, it turned out that her family had a connection with, were taught by Reverend Gyomi Kubosi, who was a Shin Buddhist writer who also knew Matsuoka Roshi. And so we began to explore Shin Buddhism together. We undertook serious training in Shin with his group, the Bright Dawn Center for Oneness Buddhism. This is a 2-year online, once a week discussion group with other students. And I've continued my regular discussions, or now semi-regular discussions with Reverend Koyo, and have been able to be a part of some of his teaching staff. So there's another part of my path in Buddhism that I passed over. It was only a few years after beginning sitting with Hojo, shortly after marrying Dorothy, that I found out I had colon cancer. There was surgery to remove it. They took out about a foot of the intestine, found that there had been an explosion of an adenocarcinoma. It was scattered throughout my abdomen, had percolated its way through to many of the lymph nodes, and it was showing up as a point of concern, probable cancer in my liver. So I was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. Being someone who had trained in healthcare services, I went immediately to the Emory Medical School library, looked up the survival curves for stage 4 colon cancer, and was shocked to learn that that suggested that I might have only as much as another 5 years of life. 95% of those with stage 4 colon cancer died in the first 5 years. I was shocked. I was distressed. I was vastly afraid. And so as soon as I learned about this, when I went back to the Zen Center at Dokusan, Hojo was not there. One of his persons that was that Hojo was precepting was there, Fred Rossini. And Dokusan, I said to Fred, "I'm dying." And he said, "Of course, yes." And I thought, he doesn't get it. I said, "No, I'm really dying." And he again said, "Yes." And I said, "I've got to explain. I have stage 4 colon cancer. I have a 95% chance of dying within the next 5 years. And he said to me, "Well, tell me, when were you not dying?" And it was an explosive realization. Since the moment of birth, I had been dying. The good news was now I knew it, where before it had been hidden to me. It was really eye-opening and in many ways freeing. And it gave me the opportunity to address head-on what to do about my next stages in dealing with cancer. I had some subsequent conversations with Hojo, who recommended to me some things that about a 1740 teacher, Cochran, had recommended as ways to deal with serious illness. One of these was a chant that I learned, and which I still chant on a regular basis, almost every morning. The other was a visualization of a healing cream that has healing herbs in it. And you put it on top of your head and allow it to melt, run into your body, and percolate through the body, and that brings healing with it. So I'm grateful to Fred for opening my eyes and to Hojo for giving me a path out. And so this has been something that's been particularly important to me. As part of this, my marriage was only 6 months old. We wound up having to move out of Atlanta to follow Dorothy's job. I finished some consulting, and my consulting practice in establishing new healthcare services took off. I was really extremely busy for the next decade, and that kept me involved with my job and with making money. And at the same time, I went to graduate school, back to graduate school, wrote a dissertation on the sociology of health. So I've had the opportunity of using my cancer in ways that benefited my understanding of Zen and Buddhism, and in ways that benefited my ability to earn an income. So we had been in Peachtree City for 10 years. Dorothy took a new job to Jacksonville. We moved down there. And my attendance at Atlanta Soto Zen Center then came essentially to an end. So when we got to Jacksonville, we began looking for a place where we might have a Buddhist practice. And we tried a Rinzai group. We tried a Vietnamese temple. We tried a Tibetan group. None of these really seemed to fit. And so we set up in our bedroom at the foot of the bed a little practice, Zendo. And looking for some kind of religious or spiritual connection, we began attending a local Unitarian church. After a year there, I approached the minister about the idea of using a classroom for a Saturday meditation group. He was supportive, Hojo was supportive, and I got the names of some of the UU members who might be interested in this. So in October of 2007, I issued an invitation both in the church bulletin and on Meetup for people who might be interested in exploring meditation. And the first meeting on October 20th of 2007, there were 12 people who showed up, including, thankfully, two who had prior Zen experience. One in Soto Zen and one in Korean Zen practice. So this was the start of what became and is still a thriving Zen Buddhist community in Jacksonville that's now being led by Ungan Bill Mayhew. It was during this time I became engaged with the Dharma Studies group, which Kua-san now chairs and does an excellent job with. So after a few years, after 10 years, Dorothy changed jobs again. We wound up moving back to Atlanta to the south side, where she was the director of sales for community. This was really too far to resume travel to Atlanta Soto Zen Center. And so with Hojo's encouragement, I joined with Ryugen David Chun to form the South Atlanta Zen Sangha. We use Ryugen's waiting room for a weekly meditation practice. We're able to move all the furniture out, set up meditation cushions, and set up an altar. All of this was pre-COVID, so we had no compunctions about packing people in. We were able to get a fish drum and gongs for chanting. Participation was sporadic. It's interesting that of the people who made a commitment to come on a regular basis, at least until family or financial problems arose, there were people who had martial arts backgrounds of one kind or another. So from that to the time of COVID, we've continued to hold meetings on every Saturday, every Sunday at the waiting room for Ryugen's practice. He's a acupuncturist and traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. But we were getting, although a lot of people signed up on Meetup, very few people came. And I began thinking about how do we perhaps broaden our outreach. And so I recognized we're in an evangelical Christian community, and there might be some other ways that we could reach out to the community. It occurred to me the local hospital might have an occasional need for someone with a Buddhist background, which led me then to their chaplaincy program. 2 years ago, I enrolled in the chaplaincy training program. I was the only non-Christian in the program, I think the only one they had ever had. So it was a real learning experience for me and for my fellow trainees. It called on us not to make judgments about the circumstances of people in the hospital. And what it asked us to do was something that, to my mind, was deeply Buddhist, which was to simply be present with persons in need without making any judgment. So I had the opportunity of sitting with families who were in deep despair at the death of an elder family member. This was an exploration of how to simply sit with someone, not offer anything unless being asked, and not being asked but not going away. I think it was valued. They said it was later. I met with some people who were getting ready to take a spouse home to die. They simply needed someone to be with them as they were making a difficult decision like this. I sat with some who were really psychotic or at best deeply disturbed. So that's another avenue for sitting without making judgments. But most of the people I was with were simply lonely. They needed someone to be with them. They weren't particularly interested in what the religious persuasion was. If they made an assumption that I was there representing Christianity and there was no need to disabuse them, I didn't. They were happy with what they thought. But some did need a Christian form of solace, and when that was needed, I could call on the chaplain training persons to provide that. They were able to do that. So this was all great practice, good practice in not making judgments about people. So as COVID progressed in early 2020, I simply stopped training at the hospital. The potential for exposure to COVID was increasing. I did not want to expose Dorothy to the disease. We were unable to get access to vaccines, and so I terminated that training, and I've not returned since, although I understand that would be an opportunity. I think there are other opportunities for me. One of which, interestingly, has been a group called Be the Bridge that exists in the community that I live in. It's an opportunity for Black members of the community and white members of the community to get together and talk about what it means to deal with racism, both from the standpoint of a person who is Black and from the standpoint of a person who is white. So there's 4 Blacks, 4 whites, 4 men, 4 women. I knew going in that this was based on a really evangelical Christianity. And so I told the members going in, I'm a Buddhist, and I'll be translating what you say and do into words that have meaning for me. They've been okay with it. We've done 2 of those training sessions, and the group has been very open, and it's been another opportunity for me to see what can be done with listening and without making judgments. As part of this, the last year I found Catholics, imagine that, Catholics with a link between Zen and their practice. Thomas Keating's Centering Prayer Group does this. Father Richard Rohr does this. It gives me a hope that there is an opportunity for dialogue between Catholics, at least, and Buddhist practitioners. So to bring this to a close, at the start of December of last year, start of December 2020, I participated in a Rohatsu sitting, or session, where you rise at dawn and have multiple meditation periods at 10 until 9 at night. Now, this was in honor of Shakyamuni's original realization of his own enlightenment at dawn on December 9th. And for the sitting that was set up for that, it was to start, I believe, at 5:30. Sitting would begin at 6, and there would be sitting and chanting, intending to celebrate Buddha's original enlightenment. I was extremely tired. I went to bed, set my alarm to get up at 5:30 so that I could participate in this final sitting. As it happened, either my alarm didn't go off or I didn't hear it. I didn't wake up until about 6:15. So I hurriedly went into the Zendo, expecting to see people still sitting. It was completely dark. There was nobody there. I wandered throughout the rest of the Zendo. Everybody had split. There was nobody in the building but me. At which I said, at the least, I can sit, I can do 3 sittings in honor of Shakyamuni's final understanding. And so I would set my alarm for a 25-minute sit. And this time the alarm would go off, unlike what it had done to get me to the original sitting. But I would sit down, I'd set the alarm, and immediately it went off. And I looked at it, and it showed 25 minutes had passed. And I thought, this is strange. Do it again. So I set another 25 minutes with the alarm. The alarm went off. I looked to see what time it is. 25 minutes had passed. I said, I don't know what's happening, but you got to do 3 sits. So I set another 25 minutes, set the alarm. It went off in my mind immediately. There were 3 25-minute sittings in which no time elapsed, at least to me. It was an amazing thing. I have no way of accounting for it. I don't know what happened. But interestingly, later, it occurred to me that I was experiencing something like what was in an old Southern Baptist song, which says, "The peace that passes understanding." I have no understanding of this, but there was tremendous peace that came with it. So, as part of that experience and as part of what I've related, I've decided that I need to be better prepared as a Zen practitioner, and I requested Angao with 2 other people who are interested, Angan and cassettes. And so we've structured that. And in the last month, I've been invited to come back to the Cancer Wellness Center to lead meditation at the local chapel, local hospital. So my conclusion is I'm still wandering. I'm wandering through Zen. I am wondering what I'm doing here. And I'm wondering what it is I can do that repays some of what I've gained, or to repay some of what I've lost. Maybe they're the same thing. Thank you.
This is going to be required viewing for everybody.
Oh no.
Oh, yes.
When you originally said do a wayfinding talk, I thought it was going to end on McClendon Avenue. And then as I got into it, I realized I am such a slow learner. And as it turns out, everything in life is something to learn from.
Right. The Great Way is not difficult, but it goes on and on and on and on. So, Suki, do you have anything to add or question you would like to bring up?
This question I have isn't necessarily Dharma related, but what had brought you to Ghana?
At the time, I was in a graduate program in population anthropology mixed with medical anthropology, and my dissertation director obtained for me an AID fellowship to go to Ghana for a year, and so I had funding to go, and it was part of my part of my population anthropology training.
So, are you an anthropologist by trade or adjacent?
Well, I am ABD in anthropology from UNC, which was the place that gave me the grant. But I had to terminate training then, and I went back later, um, needing to have a degree that would earn me money. Georgia Tech offered a degree in health planning. And so I thought, this is as close to medical anthropology as I can get and make money. So I got a master's degree in health planning from Georgia Tech. And from that, I've had a 25-year career, maybe more, in health planning. But as part of what happened during the course of that, I had these experiences that I was using as involving complementary and alternative medicine. And I had the opportunity to go back to graduate school for a PhD in medical sociology and gerontology. So I wound up going back to Georgia State, or going to Georgia State, getting a PhD in medical sociology. My degree, my dissertation, and that explored some of the things we've talked about here. So I like school. It feels safe there. But yes, I have degrees in industrial management and anthropology and medical anthropology and sociology and gerontology um, and an understanding wife who has allowed me the opportunity to do these things. There is a saying, there are those who are interested in learning more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. I have a different approach, which is I've been interested in learning less and less about more and more until finally I know nothing about everything.
There's one thread you left a little bit dangling there, which I'd like you to speak to, because you and I were engaged in this together when you were going through cancer. And you had been, for a good part of your life, you had been a consultant to hospitals. And all of a sudden you found yourself, you and I talked about this, you found yourself as a patient, and you were left on a gurney in a hallway for 45 minutes or something,
Yes.
right? And you wondered if you were going to die in the hallway here. So I think you got a perspective on things from that experience that from your career in advising the management of hospitals probably was entirely lacking. And then you came through that, and you, in this narrative that you've given tonight, which I found really wonderful and very, very coherent, running through. But that thread, there was a like a Perils of Pauline kind of cliffhanger there, that you're in the hospital with cancer, and then all of a sudden you're somewhere else doing something else. What happened in between? How did you come out of the crisis of having this cancer situation in the hospital where you're being basically neglected and seeing the underside of the belly of the
Well, it was
hospital experience? And then what was the transition out of that?
I did not mention two kinds of encounters that I had with medical practitioners. One is the kind you just described, where you're put on a gurney, you're told you're going to have a procedure or a gamma scan, and People are wheeled in after you, the ones who come in after you get taken out, and you're there for what seems hours. And so that was one kind of experience. Another kind like that was when there was an attempt to get confirmatory diagnosis that what was going on in my liver was in fact a cancer metastasis. I had to go through a procedure called a guided needle CT biopsy, where there's going to be a needle injected the size into your side and maneuvered into where the suspect area is, and a sample extracted. And so I had this done, and although I had it in my mind, well, once it gets through the skin, it'll be okay. Turns out every organ has an innervated sac around it. So going through the skin was one thing, going into the liver was entirely different. It was extremely painful. And I think the young guy who did it he was just out of high school or medical school, whichever. He had no sense of what he was doing to a person. But the sample went to the lab. They came back and they said, well, it kind of sort of looks like cancer, kind of sort of doesn't. We don't know. To which my surgeon said, we need to do another guided needle CT biopsy. To that I said, I'll die first. And he said, well, yes, that's what would happen. So I said, okay, but you cannot let this guy do it to me again. It's got to be you select someone else. And so he did. And when I went in, I told the new guy the story. And I said, I'm going to be very compliant, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to put your hands over the area that you're going into, and I want you to visualize the needle going through my skin, through the surrounding sac, and directly into the spot that we're trying to find out. And I want you to see it being withdrawn, the needle with the material going to the pathologist looking at it and coming back with a report that says there's no cancer here. So do that for me, and if you don't, lie to me. Tell me you did it. So he did that. At the end, he said, you know what's interesting? I gave you only a third of the anesthetic that you had gotten previously. And I said, well, when you did it, it was practically painless. It did go to the lab. It came back saying, well, who knows? It's kind of sort of like cancer. It kind of sort of isn't. So that was the surgical diagnosis, to which I then got sent to an oncologist. And the oncologist said, basically, we need to work together. We need to be able to have a dialogue about the upcoming treatment. It turned out that his idea of a dialogue was he would talk and I would listen. And after this experience twice, Dorothy and I looked at each other and said, we can't do this again. So I had a friend who was the director of the cancer program at Northside. And I called her and I said, I need another recommendation. She referred me to another physician whose name I knew because, as a matter of fact, he was the top admitter to the hospital. So I went to see him, gave him all that information. He said, well, you know, really, it does look like what you've got is stage 4 colon cancer. And there is no real known treatment for this. But let me do some literature review. Let's come back and look at this again in a month. And so we did that. I came back and I said, well, whatever it is, there are things that I'm going to be doing and you should know about them. And they're the things that you and I had discussed about Cochran's Soul Cream and the chant and visualizations and things like that. And he said, basically, whatever you do is going to be at least as good as anything I can do. But by the way, in the month since you've been in here, there was a journal article in the New England Journal of Medicine suggesting a 3-drug protocol that we've got no validation for, but seems to have some effect. Are you willing to try it? So I said, what have I got to lose? Yes, I'll try that. And we became friends. He was willing to listen. And as it happened, the spot that was in the liver under CT examination went away over a period of time. So there was both a deeply dissatisfying set of relationships with MDs and some very satisfying relationships with MDs. But it was that said to me, I want to understand the medical experience as seen by people who use something in addition to biomedicine. I'm sorry, I'm rattling on.
No. That's exactly what I wanted you to bring out. And I think that's important to the audience to hear. So if you could sum it up, what would you say is the diagnosis and prognosis now? Are you completely in remission? Does it seem that you have come out of this and there are no traces of it remaining as far as you can tell?
There are no traces remaining. I would say I'm in complete remission. I think part of that is due to the biomedicine that I had, which was really nasty stuff.
But most of it you attribute to me.
Yes, I do.
No, don't tell anybody. Let's edit this part out.
Then say, I attribute it to your encouraging me to follow a very different path, one that embraced understanding that where I was with a realization that life was not infinite.
Yes.
That I didn't know what it was, that I should use it to the best of my ability. And so part of that has been in my work as a consultant to healthcare, hospitals, organizations, for whom, at least as I started, I thought this was a good thing. I know with cynicism, it all turns out to be about the dollar at the end for the people who hire me. But occasionally I'll have a client for whom the project is so good and so needed that it makes sense to work with them on it. But you know, we're a capitalist society.
Yep. Well, I think this is a good message for Tsuki Taylor Brown to hear tonight. He's in the medical community, and so many other of our members are. And this is a bigger and bigger slice of the pie of living in this culture now, especially with the COVID. Everybody's been slammed and made sort of forced to become aware of this kind of reality that Buddha really preached this so long ago. So I'm very happy to hear your talk tonight, and I think it's a classic. I want to make sure that we encourage everybody to listen to the recording. And Suki, thank you so much for being there tonight to take care of this. Anybody else do we seem to have any Facebook people online who might have a question? Can you tell?
From what I can tell, I'm not a Facebook expert, but it doesn't seem that there are any comments.
Okay. Well, anybody who is online, please, thank you for attending. And please join us. Segetz is going to give a talk next Thursday and the Thursday after that and Thursday after that. So please be sure to join us again and tune in.
We'll make
Gasho
sure
to
plug
everyone.
him on Sunday. Gasho.
Yes, and on Sunday. Gasho and good night.
Gotcha. So thank you so much for